Well, hello, everybody. Jan Rutherford here with Self-Reliant Leadership. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar on coaching remote teams for performance. We're going to go ahead and get started because we have a lot to cover. And let me start out by saying coaching is hard in the best of times. And we know these are not the best of times. These are tough times. And if you can see from the graph, we have a lot of people that are quite distracted, of course. And what we might want to think that the right approach is to exhibit more command and control. But we know that's not the answer. In fact, the other day I heard a CEO remark, hey, only X% of our people are dialing into the VPN. Are they not working? Well, just because you can see people in the office doesn't mean they were working. Just because you can't see people at home doesn't mean they're not working. What that really means is we've got to figure out a new way to do this whole thing. And what's interesting is 13 years ago, Gary Hamel wrote the book called The Future of Management, and he looked at three companies: Google, Whole Foods, and Gore, as in Gore Tex. And he said, these companies are doing some amazing things. And what he said was that yesterday's practices aren't going to work. They're not adaptable nor creative enough for tomorrow's business challenges. He said that in 2007. He went on to say, we will need the courage to envision and attack the important challenges that come our way. Well, here we are, right? So our teams are counting on us to do that. And it's more important than ever because this whole virtual distance is causing all kinds of reductions in innovation and trust and cooperation, all these different things. So here we are with this big challenge. Here we are also with this big opportunity. So real quickly, I want to kind of go through what I call the recipe for coaching. And I've got 6 things that I want to go through with you. The first one is the whole idea of gaining perspective. Now, all of us have plenty of solitude these days, but by that, I really mean taking time for reflection and really figuring out, hey, there's a big circle of concern out there, the whole world, but what can we actually control? The same thing we've always been able to control. We can control where we spend our time, how we respond to our environment. When it comes to other people, we still don't control them. And we have to remember, people support what they help create. We can influence them. If we're influential enough or high enough in an organization, we have big levers that we can control, which have to do with structure, process, and incentives that change behaviors. But again, the big distractions these days are the things that are a circle of concern. So we've got to figure out, both at a macro level and a micro level, how do we minimize those distractions, how do we mitigate them, not minimize their impact. So a big part of that, and a big objective of leaders, is to really set the path, pace, and tone. And by that, I have an acronym I call TREE, and it's to say to teams, hey, the first expectation is it's all about we, not about me. It's all about the team, that there's a duty there. We still have to minimize the business interruption. We still have to produce results. We need empathy and compassion more than ever for each other, and really taking time to ask questions and understand and slowing down. And what we need to be doing is figuring out, how do we make everybody's job easier and not harder? And again, that comes from really understanding different points of view. Now, there is a conductor with the Colorado Symphony named Brett Mitchell. And Brett was on our podcast a few years ago and talked about how when he's conducting an orchestra, he really controls the pace. He really controls what needs further attention. And he went on to say, hey, there might be 14 mistakes I hear, 11 are going to take care of themselves. I've got to figure out which 3 won't, stop the rehearsal, and come at it again. He also said that great organizations, great orchestras don't just play with each other, great orchestras play for each other. That they all have a duty to come to rehearsal squared away, that they practice their piece, they're ready to play. And even though we all have our challenges at home, everybody has a duty to bring their A game to their team, because we're all counting on us to minimize the business impact in our organizations. So, you know, part of that is really understanding people's points of view, their VABES, as I call them, which I'll get into. But, you know, one of the things that they say, if you really want to understand what people value, look at their calendar, look at their bank account. But what really we want to do as leaders is really understand, you know, what do they value? What do they hold dear? What motivates them? What drives them? What's their thinking style? What assumptions do they make? What do they believe? And what do they expect? And one of the best ways I know to do that is asking really good questions. So I've got 5 of them here, and we'll make this deck available to you, so you don't have to write these down as fast as you can, or you can grab a screenshot. But some of my best questions to figure this out, instead of just calling up people saying, you know, how you doing, from a remote coaching perspective, is, hey, what do you wish you had more time to do? This really gets at priorities and figuring out, do we need to create a stop doing list as much as we create a start doing? What of the responsibilities you have right now are you avoiding? And then dig into that. Why? They don't know, or they don't want to, they don't think it's important. They don't have the time to do that. Here's the other part. What should they be delegating? What are the things that they should stop doing? And what do they feel like they need permission? What are they trying to happen over the next 3 days, 30 days, 90 days? Do they understand what it is they're trying to accomplish? And do they have a deadline? And then lastly, what's an area, if you made an improvement, would you and the others see the greatest return on time, energy, and dollars invested? So that's just a sample. And I would encourage all of us, you know, if we've got great questions, to get out there and share those, because in my opinion, that is the most significant thing that we have on the tool belt as leaders. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is effectively communicating that it's a two-way street. More than ever with remote workers, we have to make sure the communication sent is the same as the communication received. And that's what's going to align expectation. And the only way to do that is to spend more time in the future bucket than the past bucket. And the future bucket is the expectation bucket. That's where we put out our intent, our vision, and where we gain commitment. Of course, we have to go back and do accountability, where we look at status and we check in, and there's consequences for great or poor performance. But no matter what, when we are in the accountability bucket, at some point, we're going to jump right back into saying, hey, what happened isn't what we wanted exactly. Let's talk about what we need to do to remediate, what we need to do to go forward. The more time we spend in the future bucket, the less time we have to spend in the accountability. And what that means is we can't keep talking about empowering our people. We actually have to do it. And if you look at the words that describe empower, these are the things that we have to do: allow, permit, enable, energize. You look at the antonyms, we can't forbid things. We can't discourage. We have to be very clear and careful of what it means to empower people. Now, there's an article, if you can believe this, from 25 years ago on trust in the virtual organization. And they predicted that the office will just be a club, a place for eating, meeting, greeting, and places for activity, not for people. This was 25 years ago. And what they said in the article is, we need smaller groups. So those of you having 100-person all hands meeting, that might be great to convey information and purpose, but it doesn't allow for interaction. That trust needs boundaries, that we need start and stop times. We need confidence from our competence, that it demands learning and self-renewal, that it is a personal responsibility, that this trust stuff is tough, because it still means people have to live up to the expectations or the standards of the organization. It also means it takes time. We're not going to create trust and show caring and develop relationships without taking time. We can't say, hey, 15 minutes a week I'm going to spend with my direct reports, and that's that. We also need touch. And this is the whole idea of a leader's point of view. A little bit more process, a little bit less task. And lastly, this whole idea of duty, that trust requires leaders to create a shared responsibility, a shared duty amongst each other. So this remote coaching isn't just something that comes from top down, but it's something that comes from the side, from bottom up. We all need feedback. We all need coaching. We all need these different things. And luckily on the call today, I've got 4 great friends and trusted advisors and people that are really spending a lot of time in this place. And I'd like to go clockwise from Scott to Jim to Chris to Tim and get them to kind of weigh in on what I've covered and their own thoughts about building trust and remote coaching. So if we could, Scott, I'll start with you and real brief introduction. Scott Mann is a retired Lieutenant Colonel, Green Beret, has an organization called Rooftop Leadership and does all kinds of things for all kinds of people on his own. He's even become a playwright and an actor and a humanitarian. And so, Scott, great having you on. What say you, my friend?
Thanks, Jan. It's good to be on here. And looking at the people you got on this panel is pretty humbling. And I can't believe I'm batting leadoff, but I will do my best. So here's what I would just say in this very short period of time to be respectful of my brothers who are going to come behind and sisters with even better stuff than I've got. First of all, I would say when we look at remote coaching today I think it's imperative that we recognize that there is an erosion of trust that's happening in our society that was actually in place before Corona, right? So if we can remember back to that time, there have been quite a few polls taken that show that the Western world, the United States, is enduring the lowest period of trust in our history. 2/3 of Americans, according to Gallup, say they don't trust their neighbor. Now, that was before we were hoarding toilet paper. I don't know what it is right now, or before, the Papa John's guy was sitting the pizza down in front of my house like we were doing a hostage exchange, right? But I think we need to recognize that there is an erosion of trust that is at a kind of a baseline level. And so when you introduce social distancing, when you introduce remote comms, that's probably going to factor in, and we need to know that. And then I thought about, okay, when I think about remote comms and how we meet together with this new normal and what this might look like, 3 things that I share with my young Green Berets at the Q course when I talk to them about how they communicate across time and distance digitally. There's 3 elements of old school communication that I would love to see inform our present time and our digital comms. One is be present. I think we have to really focus on being present when we're in a conversation like on Zoom or WebEx or whatever, because if we're not, that will kill everything. 2 things I would say to that tactically. 1, prepare before you go in. Even if it's just 3 big breaths before you walk in, say, I have time 3 times, and lose all that crap you had from the last meeting before you sit down for the next one, right? And then second is during the engagement, notice your feet on the floor, notice your breath, be present in the conversation, and that will carry across the airwaves. Number 2, active listening. I think how we listen remotely is absolutely critical. 2 things there. Open-ended questions that allow the other party to respond to you in narratives. Jan, I love the questions that you posed. What if we just had a list of questions that we asked folks as an emotional check-in before we started a meeting? For example, I'm working with a commercial bank right now, and the first thing the president says is, let's go around the horn, tell me one good thing that's happened since our last call, right? That's a great form of active listening where you bring the emotional temperature down and you get ready to go. And then the final thing that I would say is narrative competence. Humans are story animals, and we have been for the last 70,000 years. In a crisis, storytelling becomes even more relevant. To the degree that you can use story to convey your ideas of where you are on the journey, what it will look like on the other side of this thing, how an employee has done a great job of leading through this, or as a coach, a story of another person that you've coached and how they moved through their hero's journey. so that they can locate themselves in the story and see how they relate to that and what they can learn from that. Storytelling, I believe, in this realm of remote communications is going to be essential for how we bridge these gaps. And so to recap, we're losing trust in America. We don't need to lose sight of that as we go more distant remotely. So let's make sure that we're more present, that we listen better, and that we tell better stories.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Scott. I can't tell you how much that resonates, especially the mantra of I have time, I have time, I have time, before you get into something in this frenetic pace that we all feel. So great input. I'll segue over to my good friend, Jim Vasilopoulos, also my co-host on the Leadership Podcast, the CEO and founder of Rofty Advisors up in Chicago. Jim, what say you, my friend?
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, with a great panel. And I agree with everything Scott was saying. And I really want to key in on, let's say, the storytelling portion of this, because to some degree, storytelling can contain emotion, and emotion is what drives and motivates people, and it's what we respond to. And it's rare that you see a spreadsheet and get emotional, but if someone tells you a really good story, you might might tug at your heartstrings, might get you super happy, might make you sad. And we have to understand how we respond. And so when we do our sales training, one of the things we talk about is this locker combination, and the locker combination is 7-38-55. And 7% of the way we emotionally respond to someone's message is the words they use. Only 7% is the words we use and how we emotionally respond. 38% is the tone of voice. So, how your tone of voice is coming across is really impactful, more so than your actual words. It's why we can go up to, a little puppy and we can go, "You're such a dumb, stupid little puppy." And that puppy looks up at us like, "You're the best." So tone of voice is really important. The last one being 55% is the body language and your facial expressions. And so I think it's imperative to use the right communication method when you're remote. So as much as possible, using video conferencing, seeing pictures, encouraging people to turn on their cameras so that we can see the body language, because so much gets lost in a text, so much gets lost in an email. They're convenient, they're fast, but they're not as effective. So I don't recommend that people run on low fidelity with regard to how you communicate. And because we've been thrust into this kind of remote working situation kind of suddenly for most people, some of us are quite used to this, but many have been thrust into this dramatically. I'd say there are just a couple things you want to communicate effectively with your team to have them leaning into this situation and be in that future bucket Jan talks about. I'd say really do a good evaluation of the conditions that have changed. And I think a lot of times people obsess on the conditions that have changed, but really they're only looking at a portion of those conditions that have changed. Webinars right now are, everyone thinks business might be suffering, but webinar attendance is up 1,000%. I've heard some of my clients say it's never been easier to get a sales appointment with people. And you have to be open-minded to how the conditions have changed. And the second portion of that would be like just checking your assumptions and pressure testing them so that you can, really say, hey, we might think that business might slow down, but actually I've got a couple of clients where their sales are ramping up, and that's good. And the last is just a forward focus, that future bucket, leaning in, getting on your toes, and making sure that you're exploring and helping your team explore new options, new opportunities that may not have existed, and reevaluating your obligations because they may have changed and you may now have new obligations to move forward with. I think if you practice those things in combination with the kind of stuff Jan and Scott were talking about, you're going to be on a better footing than most.
Yeah, great points, Jim. And you've always been great about making, checking assumptions and making sure that when we're having conversations that we're really digging deep and really trying to understand others' points of views and digging at those things and finding the opportunities. So thank you for your input. I appreciate it. Next on to Chris Kalenda, another retired colonel from the Army and somebody I've come to know via Michelle Flournoy's office. And Chris will be a guest on our podcast very soon. And I was on his webinar recently. And Chris, what say you, my friend?
Hey, thanks, Jen. I really appreciate you having me on this webinar. And I love your 5 coaching questions and also the discussions from Scott and Jim. And I'm going to drill down a little bit more on building trust. So, I mean, today leaders and especially middle managers are really struggling with distributed teams. And so this webinar couldn't have come at a better time. So according to Gallup, 67% of Americans report being unengaged at work. So this is going to be, of course, an even bigger challenge in this environment. And we're already hearing these sort of horror stories about endless Zoom meetings and even attempts to micromanage people by video. Just keep them on video all day and make sure that they're working. So, of course, there's got to be a better way. And one of those better ways is starting with a weekly one-on-one with each of your direct reports. So Buckingham and Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall, who you and Jim had on your podcast recently, Ashley Goodall anyway, was on your podcast. They report in their book, 9 Lies About Work, that for people who have a one-on-one sort of check-in or one-on-one weekly engagement with their leader, their productivity and engagement raised 13%, just because of that one-on-one time with their leader. So in this environment, this distributed environment, make it routine. Make it the same day of the week for each person individually. Make it the same time of day, same day of the week, every week, no compromise. Do these engagements and use 4 questions. I'm going to build on your 5 and add 4 questions that we can use to build trust with our direct reports. So the first one is your kind of safety and sanity check, a bit like both Jim and Scott mentioned. How well are you doing? How well is your family? What's going right for you right now? Start off with that emotional connection, see how they're doing. Second is, what are your priorities for this week? So there's a direct correlation between expectations and results. And making sure that we are aligned on priorities is absolutely essential. Third is, hey, what strengths are you using most this week for your work? So people who use their natural strengths at work each day are 2 to 3 times more productive than those who don't. They have 2 to 3 times higher engagement. So if we can design the work to fit the person and ensure that that person is using and work with that person so that they're using their natural strengths every day at work, their productivity is going to increase, whether they're in a distributed team or they're face-to-face. And then finally, critically, what steps can I take to help you? And that's it. Those 4 questions in a weekly engagement with each of your direct reports are going to help you build trust and see your team's productivity increase. Thanks, Jen.
Yeah, great input, Chris. And the thing that you said at the end, what can I do to help or assist? We've said before, if you're getting crickets when leaders ask, hey, what feedback do you have for me, or how can I help? It's one of 2 things: either there's apathy or there's fear. And so one thing that is really important when it comes to remote coaching and coaching in general is there should never be any ambiguity about where you stand with others, where you stand with the boss, where the boss stands with you. If people don't know where they stand, shame on the both of you. But I say, so thank you there. Last up is is Tim Cole. Tim is founder and CEO of the Compass Alliance. And I'm going to embarrass Tim by saying he is also the best boss I ever had, for all kinds of reasons. But Tim, it is an honor to have you on. What say you, my friend?
Well, first of all, thank you, Jan. And I've learned already that I never want to follow Chris, Jim, Scott, and you ever again on any kind of presentation. So middle note there. I was reflecting on your comments, Jan, and Scott's and Jim's and Chris's, and I would say first ditto, 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 ditto. I was thinking about, I had a client meeting earlier this morning. I'll share a little story with the group that in my mind embodies this notion of trust. When I was 6 years old, my dad and I, when he would come home from school, he was a school teacher, a science teacher, we would go to our little crawl space underneath our house, and we would dig out the crawl space. Now, I thought we were doing it just because it was a fun thing to do. And my dad, who was always kind of an analytical guy, I thought maybe he was, I don't know, maybe building another room. I didn't know until maybe 4 or 5 years ago when, in a conversation with my father, I asked, Dad, what were we doing then? And he said, well, Tim, we were building a bunker because it was October of 1962. And we frankly didn't know if we were going to live or die. I think back to my dad often now because he's 94. He's a World War II veteran and is probably one of the few in the state that we live in. And I talk to him often, unfortunately remotely now, even though they live only an hour away. And I think back to some of the lessons that he taught me. One of the things he taught me then that I think about now are the lessons of leadership in 1962, when John Kennedy faced a crisis unlike any that we had ever seen. And for 13 days, we sort of teetered on the brink of war. And I remind myself that one of the things that really made a difference there was this factor of trust and enabling an American public that was frightened, that was uncertain, to begin to think about the realities of what we had to do. I've learned one thing after, in my case, 40 years in industry, and that is this: even though everyone talks about trust, I've come to appreciate that it has two parents. One of them is truth, and the other is transparency. What I see oftentimes is that a lot of people talk about trust as if it's a tactical element that you toss out there and people automatically go, oh, yeah, that makes perfect sense. What I've seen in terms of my work experience, and I've seen again and again in history, is that the people that are the greatest practitioners of, the greatest champions of trust are those that deeply believe in the notion of truth, and they also believe deeply in the notion of transparency, and they are not one and the same. There are a great many people that use truth on a limited basis and then choose not to share, and there are people that are very transparent but oftentimes can't always communicate completely the truth. And so for me, when I think about some of the lessons, I think about a couple of things. One, every great leader I ever worked with, including people that sometimes work for me, like Jan Rutherford, were capable of speaking with candor and honesty and transparency, number one. Number two, and Scott called it out, they were practitioners, I think, of great storytelling skills. They helped me understand in simple terms what was most important. And then the third piece is they were capable of actively listening to my concerns, not talking to me, but actively listening. And Jan, you said something to me once a long time ago that, again, I've learned a lot from the people that I've worked with. You said, only those who care enough ask questions because they legitimately want to know. And I would tell you that in this time particularly, those of us that embrace this notion of truth and transparency and believe in the notion of trust, I think can be seismic in terms of the effect on others. Thanks for allowing me to be a part, Jan.
Yeah, gosh, Tim, thank you. And let me just share with the audience, and again, to embarrass Tim, why he's the best boss I ever had. And that is this: whenever I left a meeting with Tim, I felt like Superman. I don't know how he did it, but he always made you feeling better about yourself, even when he provided tough feedback. And, he's always been the litmus test to me for, what it takes. So as we talk about remote leadership, there's things we want people to think, there's things we want people to do, but we cannot forget what we want people to feel. And I think that's what Tim always had in the back of his mind was, how do I want this person to feel when I leave the meeting? And he always made me feel like I could, run through brick walls. So Tim, thank you for your wisdom. To kind of wrap up, and I've got one more guest before so please don't drop off. We're going a little bit over, but hang in there with me. this is what I call the coaching recipe. And remember, a big part of this as a leader, as a follower, as a participant, as a citizen, is to make it your business to know yourself, which is the most difficult lesson in the world. And right now we're learning a lot about ourselves, aren't we? So one of the last guests that we've got on is Anna Codina, and Anna is the writer of our show notes from the podcast. And Anna lives in Costa Rica. She's been a remote worker for 13 years. She's seen the best of people getting the most from her, and she's seen the worst. And unlike the five of us that you've heard from thus far, Anna is from a different generation, which is a needed perspective. So I wanted Anna to kind of weigh in. And Anna, thank you for being on the show. What say you?
Hi, thanks, Jan, for the introduction. So I have 3 points today for those of you who have remote employees currently and might be struggling. The first one is measuring remote productivity. So with remote work, we need to have a shift in focus from time-based work to value-based work. We are in a crisis mode, and it might not be realistic to expect somebody to work a full 8 hours right now. So when we have to basically emphasize the value that's being brought to the table. And in this case, the value here isn't how much time someone is putting in, but what are the priority tasks that need to get done. As a leader, we need to help guide your employees on the main objective or task at hand, break that down in bite-sized chunks so that your employees know that this is not really a 9-to-5 schedule anymore, it is a to-do list. And as long as that to-do list gets done and they're willing to work on that main objective, things in the company will be running smoothly. The second point is minimizing at-home distractions. So every household is different. So I would suggest talking to your team about them having a household family meeting and have your employees basically set boundaries with their spouse or older children based on what makes sense to them and their household. Families can share calendars with one another so that they know when dad or mom is on an important call. And people are scrambling right now to find kind of that right balance, and communicating as a family will basically help ease tension in the household. The next point here is collaboration versus isolation. It's important to be an available leader. Remind your team that you're open to talking to them and that you're there for them, not just professionally, but personally. If this is something you don't regularly do, don't just offer this just once and forget about it. People need to be reminded or need to hear the same message at least 14 times before they will take action. So even if you sound like a broken record, let them know you're available. You can create a scheduler link where your team can see availability on your calendar and schedule in one-on-one time with you to basically automatically reduce any back and forth scheduling, communication, or email backlog, for example. So basically, to reiterate the 3 points again, look at remote work with a value focus instead of a time focus. Minimize at-home distractions by having your team talk to their family and set boundaries. And collaboration versus isolation. Be an available leader. Remind your team constantly that you're there for them and that you're in this together. This is a great opportunity for you guys to shine as a leader, and it's okay if you don't have all the answers. This is new territory for a lot of us. But if you're open to working with your team on finding those answers, you will come out stronger because of it. And finally, I'd like to end on a story. As a remote worker, I've seen, the good and the bad of how remote work can be. One example of how remote work can simplify a business is with one of my current clients. I've been with them for nearly 6 years, and I've seen them grow from 1 to 2 employees to basically 30 people in these last 6 years. We've had a total of 2 team meetings altogether. So, they don't, and they also don't even have to look for talent because talent is knocking on their door. This is because they have a lot of benefits. They're a 100% remote company, so they have access to a wide pool of talent. They trust their people, and they've set processes up for the entire company to run smoothly. Everybody knows what they're supposed to be doing, and because of this, we each hold each other accountable, and we do good work with little to almost no upper management involvement. So there's a lot of possibilities in remote work, and it can really revolutionize the way you do things now. Maybe you can't be a 100% remote company based on the industry you're in, but what would a 25% remote company look like for you? Remote employees are about 35% happier, and retention rates are much higher than in-office employees. They're also much more cost-effective as well because you don't have to account for office space and additional resources. So when this crisis is over, I hope it gives you a new way to look at and leverage remote work. Thank you, Jan.
Oh, thanks, Anna. Great points, and very, very practical. And as you said, the organization you referenced, you've had very few meetings. And, you know,
Yeah.
part of it is, you know, there's a lot that can get done even without some of those touches. And as you indicated, a big component there is trust, that they do good work. And then management can focus on what only management can do.
Yes.
They don't have to be in the weeds and the day-to-day things. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, everybody, that sort of wraps up our meeting today. I would love to do this again with the same panel and make it even more interactive. And we can do this again, and we will. So any comments that you've got, send them my way. If you'd like the deck, send it, you know, let me know through that link that I provided, selfreliantleadership.com/contact. And if there's certain things or topics you'd like, or certain panelists you'd like to see on, let us know. Jim and I on the Leadership Podcast continue to interview people every single week. And coming up this month, we're going to be interviewing Simon Sinek and General Martin Dempsey in his new book. So that's another great resource for all of you. And again, appreciate you taking the time out today. We'll post this online, and I hope you're able to share it widely.